enlarging that for all of the folks to see at home. For those playing the game at home, yes, indeed, the game of politics is a sad one, and unfortunately, only the most obnoxious win. So we've got a lot more to discuss, and I want to get back to the stories about what Israel is doing in the region. As we look at this, a reminder from yesterday, thanks to Anti-War, Netanyahu says he directed Israeli military to take more territory in Gaza. That, of course, from antiwar.com. As we see also, UN reports detail rape, gang rape, and genital violence against Palestinian detainees by Israeli forces. The UN Secretary General's report submitted to the Secretary Council verifies 31 victims of sexual violence linked to Israeli forces in 2025 against 14 men and 7 women. So there's that. And now we get to this. This is the big breaking story that is really gripping people. And Daniel Davis retweets from Ben Freeman, and it looks like the people at Code Pink have really been getting this out. We'll show you what the story is. Daniel Davis writes, "This is outrageous. This is in the NDAA, folks. This is outrageous and stripping back the facade. President Trump and Congress are trying to make the United States Armed Forces an auxiliary for use by the Israeli Prime Minister to fight his wars." Daniel Davis, of course, a retired colonel. "We should be distancing ourselves dramatically from Israel because their wars are a direct drain on American lives and resources and a significant harm to our country. But that the alleged United States Congress, they are acting more like the Israeli parliament, is trying to codify an even closer relationship exposes that there is no America First element in Washington, D.C. There is only a surrender to Israel. This is a shame and a stain on the genuine American patriots who serve our country." So let me show you this. Ben Freeman's got this in a thread. I've got the actual story. You can see the headline: Congress quietly moves to integrate U.S. and Israeli militaries. It's in the House version of the 2027 NDAA. All right, now, that's the opener. Before we go any deeper, I want to show you Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. Headline: Congress quietly moves to integrate U.S. and Israeli militaries. That is at Responsible Statecraft. We'll get to that in a minute with the details. But here's Medea Benjamin, who really got the word out and is doing a great job on this. Here's more. Check this out.
Please pay attention to this, folks. The pro-Israel forces in Congress are trying to merge the U.S. and Israeli militaries. I'm not kidding. Yes. While the American public is against sending billions of dollars to Israel, Israel and its supporters in Washington have found a new, far more insidious way to deepen U.S. support for the Israeli military. They're shifting away from that unpopular aid to military integration. Tucked inside the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the massive annual bill that funds and sets policies for the Pentagon, is something called Section 224, the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. It sounds harmless, but it's not. This provision would dramatically expand military integration between the United States and Israel, going far beyond the $200 billion in military aid the U.S. has already provided since 1948. Here's all the things it would promote: joint weapons development, co-production, technology sharing, AI cooperation, cyber operations, autonomous weapon systems, biotechnology, quantum computing, and even network integration and data fusion. At a time when Israel is continuing its rampage in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and has pushed the U.S. into this disastrous war in Iran, Congress is proposing to bind our military even closer to Israel's. That's right. Section 224 would move the Israeli relationship away from the little public scrutiny there is in Congress into the opaque world of military contracts and weapons purchases. It would make it harder for Congress and us, the public, to hold anyone accountable. That's why we need to let Congress know we are watching, and they must reject Section 224, and more important, cut ties to the Israeli military altogether. No joint weapons projects, no intelligence fusion, no military-industrial merger. None.
Thank you, Medea Benjamin. Good job on her part. And the idea of being bound to this barbarism is already offensive enough, and they're going to make it worse. And let me show you one of the angles of this that has just popped up on X. And if you were watching my X feed while the theme for the show was going, that story went out on my X feed, thanks to the Russians working fast. But I want to make the deeper philosophical point here, which, of course, many people probably thought I would anyway, and I want to make sure that I do. The idea of being bound through compulsion to anything is offensive. And this is the problem. You are bound to the United States collectivist we of so-called national defense as they define it, and as it has been steered over the decades to be essentially the defense and offense of the Israeli expansion. You are bound to whatever the ship of state wants. You are their ship's galley slave. You're on the boat. They brought you aboard. They are the pirates in your life. The state is piratical, and it will not stop. And this is just an example that many people are finding extremely offensive because of the very clear genocide, lies, deception, land seizure, and other things that the Israeli Zionist state has been doing since 1947. And then earlier than that, the machinations of very, very corrupt people, ranging from the Rothschilds to people in Great Britain to others, and the United States as well. And all of this comes as a lesson to recognize that unless people recognize the ethical primacy of individual control and the importance of the golden rule, negative reciprocity, you have no right to tell someone else they have to pay for your protection or their own protection, because then you're the aggressor. That negates any state involvement with what is so-called protection as the state defines it, and you can see now where they're going. Let me show you more details in case anybody is skeptical of this. So if we go into my X feed, you'll see some of the latest releases. Here's this. This is AIPAC Tracker. This is alarming, they note. A new section of law in the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, would give Israel unprecedented access to American technology and would force the United States military to integrate Israeli defense technologies into our own critical military supply chain, giving Israel incredible leverage over America's own defense priorities. Now, here's a new policy. Take action. Congress quietly introduced plans that would intertwine our military with Israel's, like it's not already. Given, of course, it's going to get worse. Giving Israel unprecedented access to American military technology and research at a time when public opinion to the Israeli government is at an all-time low.
Every year, America gives billions of dollars of our money to fund Israel's military. Now, even Republicans, even Benjamin Netanyahu, are talking about changing that. But don't buy it. It's a shell game. What Congress is trying to do now is find different ways of entrenching the relationship so deep in America.
Now, what does he mean? And that's a little bit low. What does he mean? Every year, the United States gives billions. Well, we know as part of an integrated and always pass $3.8 billion package always goes to Israel. Every year, $3.8 billion in aid, military aid, and things like that. They use it directly to give them weapons, and then the Israelis also get money to buy more weapons for their socialist collectivist nation state sitting on Palestinian land. The latest from DropSite shows you this. No, it's not DropSite. Hold on a second. Yeah, Kelly Vlahos has this. Netanyahu and Lindsay say that it's fine to shut down that $3.8 billion a year in military aid. Oh, you see what they're doing there, right? They say, oh, it's fine to shut that down. Why? Because they are integrating United States Israeli military together. So there won't even be a line item number. It will all be part of American defense. That's where they're going. Let me show you more. This is incredible, and it's for real. They don't tell you. They say it's fine to shut down the $3.8 billion a year in military aid. Now, why would Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham ever say that? Well, they don't tell you how they will make it up, by so-called partnering with the U.S. military directly. It begins here, says Kelly Vlahos. This is an alarming read by Brian Freeman, and we're going to go to Responsible Statecraft. Now, I got the direct link to this article in my news notes, and that is right there. Okay, if you want to find that story. I found it not through Kelly, but I'm so glad Kelly put that out there. Here it is, and that's Ben Freeman. That's the man we saw his thread a little bit earlier. In the first steps towards shifting aid further into the shadows, the House's 2027 NDAA would all but fuse the two countries' armed forces together. So you don't need to have the line item 3.8. In fact, it's better not to have it because it draws attention to itself by having it there. If you blend them, if you make them one gestalt creature, then you don't have to worry about it. It's all part of U.S. NDAA defense. It's all part of what, of course, we know people like Tulsi Gabbard voted for every year, despite claiming they were for peace. At a time when the American Republic is expressing unprecedented levels of distrust in the Israeli government, Congress just proposed tying the U.S. to the Israeli military more than ever before. Again, this is Ben Freeman writing this, and it was just released today. Buried in the House version of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, released on Tuesday, is Section 224, entitled United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. That's the USIDTCI. That they'll probably just call it IDTIC or IDTCI or something. The provision would arguably do more to intertwine the U.S. military with the Israeli military than the more than $200 billion, inflation adjusted, in military assistance Israel has received from the U.S. since its founding in 1948. Section 224, again, entitled United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, USIDTCI. Section 224 lays the groundwork for bilateral research and development, co-production of weapons. So you know what's going to happen there. Just like there's a weapons making facility in Kiev, I think it's Boeing or Lockheed Martin, they will open plants in Israel. Joint ventures, licensing agreements, and seemingly every manner of U.S.-Israeli military-industrial complex cooperation. The U.S. and Israel already work together heavily on missile defense, but this provision would greatly expand coordination to seemingly every area of defense tech, including AI, quantum, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber, biotech, and many more. Again, I want to read these again. Production of weapons, joint ventures, licensing agreements, and seemingly every manner of U.S.-Israeli military-industrial complex cooperation. If fully enacted, this proposal would provide a higher level of military-industrial integration than the U.S. has with any other country in the world. To be sure, the U.S. has worked closely with its NATO partners, and of course it opens up a lot of graft in the feedback loop for people like Witkoff and others, some of their family members, even Donald Trump, to invest in Israeli companies, which will then, of course, get contracts in Israel to start doing this work. The U.S. has worked closely with its NATO partners in co-production and shared supply chains, most notably via the Defense Production Action Plan. And as the #1 arms dealer in the world, the U.S. provides weapons to militaries across the globe. But that is mostly a one-way street, with the U.S. providing weapons to foreign buyers who only occasionally make parts for those weapons themselves, in the case of the F-35's global supply chain. Section 224 would be a different beast entirely. It would fuse the U.S. and Israeli defense sectors in multiple areas vital to the battlefields of the future, like autonomous systems and cyber. It would also bring extraordinary Israeli influence to the U.S. beyond what it already has through the Israeli lobby and its robust network of social media influencers. That is exactly the key. That's precisely what they want to do. They want to build a corporate fascist nexus inside Israel with businesses that start up there through this that will never stop, because influencers in the United States working for them will make sure that the money goes to Washington people who like them. And of course, the American public would see jobs disappear. Their businesses would go down. Stocks might fall. It would give the Israeli government the opportunity to greatly expand one of the most powerful levers of influence in U.S. politics, jobs in the U.S. By expanding or starting new co-production facilities like it already has in Mississippi and Arkansas, the Israeli government could boast of providing jobs on U.S. soil, thereby securing allies among members of Congress who represent the districts where those jobs lie. The result could well be a U.S. political system even more susceptible to the whims of an Israeli government that seemingly has no qualms about drawing the U.S. into military conflicts in the Middle East. This unprecedented level of U.S.-Israeli military integration stands in stark contrast to the traditional aid model of defense cooperation, in which Israel, already a corrupt model, in which Israel already stood out as the top recipient of U.S. military assistance. As laid out in a recent Quincy Institute brief authored by Stephen Simon, this shift from an aid model to a military integration model has troubling implications. Namely, the shift will strip away the political and diplomatic oversight mechanisms that make the relationship publicly accountable, moving it from a visible annual aid vote into the opaque machinery of defense acquisition. Overall, we're talking here, where oversight is limited and political accountability is minimal. The result would be a defense relationship that is simultaneously deeper and less transparent. This all comes at a time when the Israeli military has repeatedly used U.S. weapons in strikes that have violated international humanitarian laws in Gaza, and as Israel has repeatedly violated ceasefires, and has the U.S. as has the U.S. itself in the Trump administration's unnecessary war with Iran. The enormous gulf between what most Americans want and what the president is doing when it comes to Israel and what Congress is proposing here should not be ignored. Just 30% of respondents to a New York Times Siena poll from mid-May believe Trump made, quote, the right decision to go to war, and he completely contrary to the Constitution, so they ought to learn, with Iran, with 64% saying it was wrong. An Institute for Global Affairs poll released earlier this week dove even deeper into the American psyche when it comes to arming Israel, finding that, quote, just 16% say the United States should keep supplying Israel with weapons without new restrictions. Now, I want to pause there, and I just want to mention, this is a way for Israel to make it monetarily important for American psyche to change. That's what they're doing. Though slowly, tides within both parties are shifting more and more. Members are speaking out against the growing divide between Israel's actions and America's interest. For example, Chris Van Hollen, a real standout here and a real standout for people like Abrigo Garcia and those people trapped at CCOT. Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, wrote in the New York Times on Tuesday, quote, the Democrat Party has provided reflexive and unconditional support to Israeli governments, even as their actions have increasingly undermined American interests and values. On the Republican side, of course, there's Thomas Massie of Kentucky and former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. What can other members of Congress who are concerned about Israel's destabilizing actions do right now? Stop the Israeli-U.S. military-industrial merger in its tracks. How are they going to do that if it's in the NDAA? You see what they've done. Don't forget, again, 2016, March of 2016, I was reporting on the Portman-Murphy Countering Foreign Propaganda Bill. That was incorporated into the NDAA, and it was one of the last things that Barack Obama signed in December of 2016. was for the 2017 NDAA. And that provided let me see, $75 million per year for 2 years, $150 million total for whatever news outlets the Defense Department and whatever the CIA and other BlackRock type organizations, the Atlantic Council, thought were favorable to the message they wanted to put out about Ukraine, about whatever. That's why I got silenced. That's why NewsGuard went after me. And perhaps they went after other people during the so-called pandemic. Why? Because they were fed millions of dollars to be able to get their message out. And so NewsGuard got paid to literally send letters to me to tell me that they were skeptical of my argument. And then I would show them that they could click on the hyperlinks and find the evidence. And then I challenged them to debates, and they never would debate, of course. Love to get Eric Shiner on to talk about that. That is a big deal. You'll find that re-exed from Kelly Vlahos and the other folks at Responsible Statecraft. That is a big, big deal. And if it's not stopped in the NDAA, then those ties between America and Israel, those won't be stopped either.